Oh, okay. Hello, everybody. This is Mr. DeStefano, and since we're not going to have a class this afternoon, I wanted to be sure you got the information on the English Civil War, so I created this very, very quickly this morning. This is not exactly going to be my best work, but I did my best. The notes which we were going to take in class, we were going to take on the board and do that during a class discussion. However, again, since we're not going to have class this afternoon, I threw together expeditiously this presentation so that you can better understand the English Civil War. So if you could see the agenda for today, we were going to review the 30 Years' War, and I think you guys pretty much know that. However, just in case, page 461, the section 30 Years' War, there were two subsections: causes of the war, effects of the war, and we talked about that a little bit yesterday, okay? Again, tomorrow we can review that a little more if necessary. I don't think you guys need to read the next page, 461, Revolutions in England, again. I graded your 14.2 outlines. They all look pretty good, so I think you got all the information with that. And today we were going to supplement that with class discussion on the actual English Civil War. Okay. So moving on to the English Civil War. All right, setting the trend, we remember back to the Tudor dynasty, Henry, Edward, Elizabeth. Those monarchs were very well liked by the English people. When they ruled as if they were capable. They were intelligent, and they followed a very popular / moderate foreign policy, which centered around the opposition of Catholic Spain. And also, within England, the Tudors helped the middle class, and they provided law and order, encouraging trade, and they furthered overseas expansion over into the New World, and they appeared to consult Parliament, which means they didn't act as absolute rulers. They would work with Parliament, they would talk with Parliament, however, they did dominate the legislature. Okay. And then, eventually, come the Stuarts. 1603, Elizabeth, the last Tudor ruler, died. She never married, so there was nobody to take over in the Tudor family, so over comes her cousin, James I from Scotland, and his dynasty. Now, it wasn't under James that the English Civil War began, but indirectly he did kind of start it. The early Stuart ruler, King James, he was very, very arrogant. He was stuck up, and he really believed in the divine right of kings. He believed God chose him to be the king of England, and he did not have to listen to Parliament, and he did not have to consult Parliament. Okay. In addition to that, his foreign policy, particularly towards Spain, was very unpopular because he tried to befriend Spain, and the English do not like Spain. James would also discriminate against a new branch of Protestantism called the Puritans, okay? And the Puritans were a breakoff of Calvinists, and they believed that Anglicanism, the Church of England, was way too similar to Catholicism, and they wanted to purify the practices of the Anglicans. And then James also hurt the middle class. He taxed the middle class very heavily, and he focused more on making life good for the wealthy in England. So James was pretty unpopular. And one of his quotes was, "Kings are justly called gods, for that they exercise a manner of resemblance of divine power on earth." He upset the Puritan-controlled Parliament by not ridding the English Church of Catholics or making Puritan moral reforms. Okay. So, James eventually dies in 1625, and his son Charles I takes over. Hoping for something better than James, Parliament and many of the lower-class people in England did not receive it. Charles was very unpopular. He was constantly at war with France. Now, the English didn't really care for France too much, but wars cost money, and he needed to finance the wars. So much like his dad, he taxed the middle class heavily. Anybody spoke out against Charles, they would automatically be put in prison. Parliament did not like this. Parliament spoke out against this, saying, "Charles, you do not have the power to tax people at your leisure, and nor do you have the power to imprison people who disagree with you." But Charles wouldn't have it. So Parliament came up with the document, the Petition of Right. 1628, in the Petition of Right, Parliament protested the despotism of Charles I and reaffirmed that the monarch, according to English law, may not levy taxes without Parliament's permission, imprison persons without specific charges, They may not also create new taxes. Parliament asked Charles, please sign the Petition of Right, and he did. However, he certainly had no intention of abiding by it. Okay, so he ignored the document. He disregarded the Petition of Right, and he denied Parliament's authority to curb his divine right of kings. So, 11 years, Charles did not even call Parliament into session. He did not consult Parliament on anything. He considered himself more or less an autocratic ruler, which means one-person rule. He could do whatever he wants. He illegally raised money through new taxes. He illegally imprisoned people that opposed him. And he would also not allow people the right of trial by a jury. Okay? So this led to many of the clashes with Parliament, and of course, especially the middle-class people of England are not going to like this at all. And that led to the Puritan Revolution, eventually coming to be known as the English Civil War. Parliament rallied the middle class, the small landowners, and the Puritans, a group collectively called the Roundheads. Charles I had a military of his own. He had the support of the wealthy nobility, the wealthy landowners, and the high Anglican clergy, and this was a group collectively known as the Cavaliers. And this becomes an all-out civil war. The Cavaliers siding with Charles against the Roundheads, siding with Parliament. Now, where the 30 Years' War was mostly a war based on religion, this war was based on the idea of absolute monarchy versus a constitutional monarchy. Absolute monarchy where the king has all the power, constitutional monarchy. So, in the English Civil War, 1642 to 1649, you have the Cavaliers or Royalists, who were the king's supporters, versus the Roundheads or the Puritans, who were the supporters of Parliament. And they were led by an ardent Puritan parliamentary member named Oliver Cromwell, who we know very, very well by this point of the class. Oliver Cromwell's military decisively defeated the Cavaliers or Royalist armies. Okay, so the Civil War was over, Parliament wins, and now what to do with King Charles? Well, we're going to look at that a little more at the end of this presentation, but King Charles was essentially put on trial for treason. He refused to defend himself, and he was convicted and executed. This was the first time a monarch was executed publicly, and it shocked a lot of people. And it seemed like a very extreme measure. However, as our course moves along, if there's ever an overthrow of a monarch, you have to execute the monarch, and you have to execute his sons. His sons, though, Charles II, James II, fled, so they were safe for the time being, okay? And now England's left with the question, well, what do we do? Who's going to rule England? We don't have anything in place. England was declared a republic, or a commonwealth is another word you can use for it, okay? And Cromwell, the victorious leader, was placed in charge of England and declared himself a military dictator, which is almost as bad, if not worse, than an absolute monarch. And he ruled as a Puritan, but he never got popular support. Okay? He had to tax the people heavily because, again, wars cost money. And Puritans were very intolerant of the Anglican religion. And remember, Anglicanism for years now had been the state church of England. The goal was to purify Anglicanism so that it was not so similar to Catholicism. However, that did not make many Anglicans very happy. So we'll move on to the trial and execution of Charles now. And for this, we'll have to go back over to the Portal website, okay? Now, the trial and execution of King Charles, it was only reluctantly that Parliament decided on the necessity of executing Charles in 1649. This extreme position was reached due to the king's failure to negotiate a settlement, his untrustworthiness, and having escaped from custody in 1646, and his conduct during the Civil War. But many refused to recognize the legitimacy of Parliament placing the king on trial. Indeed, Charles refused to defend himself at the trial, claiming it was an illegal trial, since as king by divine right, there was no authority on earth with the power to sit in judgment over him. When Charles was executed in January 1649, many were shocked, and Charles actually became revered by many as a martyr king. Okay. Even Oliver Cromwell visited the coffin of executing King Charles I, and he called it a cruel necessity. Think about that. Why would it be considered a cruel necessity? So we'll want to go to the Portal site, and under Unit 3, you may have already seen it, the trial and execution of Charles I. I'd like you to read that article and then write or type a paragraph in response to this question. How did the people of England feel about the execution of King Charles I? Was his execution necessary or unnecessary, and why or why not? And then tomorrow we'll start preparing for our class debate, and the question we will be debating tomorrow is, should England be ruled as an absolute monarchy? So, hope you guys have a good night. If you have any questions, bring them to class tomorrow, and I will see you all 4th block tomorrow.